Okay, well, good afternoon once again, and thank you for joining us here on our Tuesday afternoon Facebook Live, broadcasting from the digital arm of Seminary Ridge Museum. My name is Pete Miele, Chief Operating Officer and Director of Education at Seminary Ridge Museum, and I'm joined here, as always, by Dr. Black. And as we wait for people to come online, talk a little bit about what we have going on over the next couple of weeks as we continue to ride out this quarantine in virtual isolation. We have our regular Tuesday afternoon Facebook Lives at 2 o'clock. Next Tuesday, I'm going to be talking about African American history in the Pennsylvania-Maryland borderlands. The week after that, on the 19th, Daryl will be talking to Chris Moore about his new book on J. William Jones. And then the week after that, on the 26th, I'm going to be talking about W. Keene, a surgeon in the who serves as a surgeon in the Civil War, but whose life pretty much extends throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries and sees a lot of advances in medical care. And then on Friday, the last Friday in May, we're going to have a special event for our members, a Civil War Seminary Ridge walking tour. So if you joined us, a week and a half ago for our first member happy hour. Yeah, right.
Wow. Time feels like it's racing by, and time feels like it's completely suspended.
Yeah. What day is it? May. So it's something like that. So you'll want to join us for that, and we'll be getting some information out on that as pretty soon. So as you watch this video, please share, please like it. We're doing these again as the museum is closed, and we're trying to get continue to interact with folks online. So please continue to like and share. If you have any questions or comments about anything that you see here today, please put them in the comment section. Rob Williams is running the back end of things, and he's going to be watching out for comments, and we'll get to them during and towards the end of the discussion. So today we are going to focus on a figure who sort of consumes everything that we do. I think he's constantly surrounding us, both in the work that we do at Seminary Ridge Museum and the physical location where we are. Our offices are in Schmucker's home, Samuel Simon Schmucker's home, built in 1833. So he's sort of a constant presence in our lives, and what we want to do today is sort of do a part one, the formative years of Samuel Simon Schmucker, and sort of look at where Schmucker comes from, his early education and his early life experiences leading up to the founding of Gettysburg Seminary in 1826. And just before we begin, a little bit about the image that's behind me. This is the first known image of seminary of the Lutheran Seminary at Gettysburg. It was actually painted in 1833, most likely from a verbal description of what the seminary was going to look like, because the Krauth House, which is above this shoulder, was not built yet, but it did make it into the painting. So it was done by Frederick Belenis of Westphalia and presented to Schmucker in 1833. So it's one of my favorite images of the seminary grounds, and it's the seminary as Schmucker would have known it as when he was the president there for a period of almost 40 years. So Daryl, anything to add yet?
It's funny. I mean, you made the comments about the omnipresence of Schmucker. If you look at the picture of Schmucker's house, which is over Pete's other shoulder, and you look at the two windows on the second floor to the right, as you're looking at it, right there, Pete, you got your finger right on the window that I'm looking out right now. So anyway, yeah, it's Schmucker's an incredibly important figure in American history, and in American Lutheranism, and he's probably not as well known as he needs to be. He really wades into some pretty deep waters as far as ethnicity and American identity goes in the mid part of the 19th century, and really is a fascinating thinker, a fascinating pastor, a fascinating leader of the most important Lutheran institution in the United States in the mid 19th century. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to overstate how significant this guy's contributions were and how well known he was in the United States, and especially in the mid-Atlantic states in the mid part of the 19th century. So,
both positive and negative.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very polarizing figure, and one of the reasons that he's such a polarizing figure is that he strikes out for some new territory and new ground in the Lutheran Church as it develops in the United States after the end of the end of the 18th century. So what we want to do is give a little context to Schmucker's experience and to Schmucker's theological figurings, the ways that he came to be a very controversial individual within the Lutheran Church. So I'm going to kind of take the front part of that, and Pete's going to take the biographical portion of the conversation. Of course, we'll be bouncing back and forth. There are points where an illustration from Schmucker's life might be very helpful in this contextual view. So what I'm doing, this is a conversation, or my part of the conversation is very much informed, quite literally informed by the work of Mark Noll, the great religious historian who published a book about 15 years ago called America's God. And it's a fantastic read, fantastic book that covers the social history of theology and church practice in the United States, well, British North America, and then the United States. So from 1730 or so until the end of the American Civil War. If you really want to understand American cultural history, American religious history, it's a book you have to read. There's now been a generation of scholars who have used this book as kind of their primary foundation block for thinking about American religion in the 18th and 19th century. So Mark Noll, America's God, fantastic book. Noll also wrote a book that kind of riffs off of some of the points that he makes in theological points that he makes in this book, in a later book about the Civil War's theological crisis. So a great figure to explore and to learn a lot about American religious history in the mid 19th century. So Mark Noll's America's God. So we'll write that down later on and put it in the comments and share that with you. So in any case, the big point here is that between 1730 in British North America and then in the United States, between 1730 and 1860, there's a lot of change going on religiously. It's an incredible period of ferment. You've got the first and second Great Awakenings, third Great Awakening, the 1850s awakening included in this period. You've got the rise of Methodism. You've got the development of the Baptist Church as a powerful institution, particularly in the southern states in the years before the war. You have the debates over strict Calvinism in the Presbyterian and the Congregational churches. You've got revivalism through this, and you've got some really serious rethinkings about the relationship between people and God, and the ways that people gain salvation and the ways that they function in the world. So really what's happening, and it's the same thing that John Butler points out in his work on the American Revolution, that there's really a revolution before the fighting starts. There's some changes that are going on that are, as Butler puts it, Americanizing theology, social life, cultural life, economic life in the decades before the fighting of the rebellion starts in 1775. So this is the period of the First Great Awakening. This is the period in which the 1730s, 40s, and 50s that the ideas of Calvinism and particularly the notion that only the elect will get to heaven came under some serious fire in American churches. and began to lose a little bit of its authority, though it continued to be authoritative, an authoritative way of interpreting the Bible for many, many, many decades after, through the 19th century. We talked about this last week with Calvinism and the literalist reading of Southern Baptists. So it's not a Calvinism doesn't go away, but it's being questioned by people who have a more Arminian approach. And the basic difference is that Arminians believe that individuals can approach God and ask for salvation, approach Christ and ask for salvation. Calvinists, on the other hand, of varying stripes, believe that God has an elect. You don't know that you're elect. You continue to live your life in a pious way, in an upright way, and maybe you'll get a sense of whether you're really one of the true converted or not. So that's the essential difference between those two. And there's a lot of fighting going on theologically over those two concepts through the 18th and 19th century. What is happening is that, especially as you go through the violent phase of the Revolutionary era, there's a very significant engagement between Protestant theology and the revolutionary changes that are going on. And it's not just something that's going on in the United States. It's a theme that you have seen in early modern Britain with the Puritan challenges to the Church of England. You're beginning to see questioning of the authority of those ecclesiastical bodies. The ecclesiology or the church order is being challenged in very, very significant ways in Europe. It goes so far in Britain to the point of a civil war in which the Puritans are fighting the crown. So there's a very deep history of this critique of institutions, of structures, of understandings of how God relates to man, and it really accelerates in the American context, and particularly accelerates in the years after the Revolution is finished, as a military experience. Peter, you get some questions there, or?
No questions yet, but I want to point out that Schmucker is kind of born right at the center point of the timeline that you established. He's born in 1799, so he lives until 1873. So he almost takes the entire second half of that 1730 to 1865 timeline.
Yeah, and by the time he is a mature man, going to school, going to academy, going to seminary at Princeton, this whole notion of a heightened spiritual inwardness has become predominant, and that's very much at the core of the shift. This sense of a move from a more collective, traditional, you'd say Catholic, Orthodox Church practices, Church of England, of course, the Lutheran Church, the German speaking wing of the Reformation, is a part of this shift. But the spiritual and this heightened sense of the individual, of the individual's role in making history. Calvinists would say this is all in God's hands, and God's going to direct all of the events of human history. But somebody who's both thinking Arminian theology, I can approach God for salvation. I can think for myself. Common sense philosophy plays into this. Republican politics, small r Republican politics. The notion that people can do things for themselves, and people don't need to be led. And this is beginning to change. This is about the time that Schmucker is born. This is really becoming the dominant way that Protestants in the United States are looking at faith and looking at church organization. There's a lot of questioning after the American Revolution of these ecclesiastical bodies, like the Episcopal Church, like the Lutheran Church, that has bishops and hierarchical organizations. And in contrast to that, you've got that strong Congregationalist tradition in New England, and even in some parts of coastal Georgia and South Carolina, congregational presences You've got in particularly the Baptist response to this, which is a hyperactively local way of organizing churches. Each congregation kind of stood to itself, and in some places, particularly in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia after the American Revolution, the Baptists really are the leaders of the evangelical movement, and for a few reasons. And one of the biggest reasons, though, is that the Methodist Church was mistrusted by Americans, and certainly the Church of England was mistrusted by Americans because they had too much of an attachment to those hierarchical, ecclesiological, bureaucratic structures and organizations. So there's a move towards individualism. There's also a big shift in the way that the economy is working in the first part of the 19th century. As you begin to see a liberal, market-oriented, international-oriented economy, an economy that's not moving from home production to factory production, and then to larger mills, people's social relations change. The needs of people change, and the needs of managers change. There's one great interpretation by a fellow named Paul Johnson called The Shopkeeper's Millennium, way back in 1975 or 76. It was a great study of the burned over district of New York that made a very direct correlation between the interests of the factory owners and the ministers who are trying to help discipline workers who are making this transition into an industrial form of labor. So lots of interconnections. Methodism is as you move later on into the 19th century begins to take off because it is very well adjusted to this new market. It's Arminian in its theology, and it embraces some of the more extreme versions of revivalism with the anxious bench, the immediate conversion, a focus on emotional response to preaching. An immediate conversion. This is helping people make order out of what seem like very disordered lives. Because there's a lot of change that's taking place more broadly. I mean, think about the telegraph. You think about the steam trains. Think about steamboats. You think about the speed with which life is moving and the ways that it's being reorganized between 1780 or so and 1840. It's a pretty disruptive period. So people are looking for some structure, but they're looking for structure that kind of fits within their lived experience. And increasingly, that is not something that the confessional churches, like the Lutherans, are well suited to adapt to, particularly the individualism, particularly this sense of inward focus. There's in the confessional churches, there's a much broader emphasis on the spirit of the word, a unified biblical whole, a hermeneutic that focuses on the Bible as a whole rather than a literalist hermeneutic, which becomes very much important, very much the core of Baptist, Methodist Congregationalist life in the 19th century. This literalist reading, which creates all kinds of problems. Remember, we talked last about the pro-slavery theology in the South and its roots in literalism. And it's not only in the South that you're seeing this literalism playing out, it's all across the United States. And in fact, the most common way of interpreting the Bible is along those literalist lines that come out of Reformed theology, that come out of this common sense philosophy that says everybody has the capacity within them to interpret and understand and read, or read, understand, and interpret biblical text. It's a very hyper-individualized and very radical for the time approach. And the churches in the United States are developing very differently than they are in other parts of the Western world. And I just want to reemphasize this issue of what Noel calls the American synthesis, and kind of set Pete up for talking about Schmucker, because there are three things here, and it bears repeating. There's a major emphasis on conversion. So think revivals, think the anxious bench, think about the core of religious experience being the conversion of the individual soul. And that becomes increasingly important in the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, with this focus on conversion, on change, on pietistic behavior, on performing holiness in the context of the Methodist Church. So that's the first thing. There's this emphasis on conversion, and it's an adult conversion. It's not becoming a part of the church at birth through baptism. The second thing is the supreme authority of the Bible. This way of looking at religion undermines century and a half more of how Christians interpreted the Bible, used the Bible. The notion of confessionalism, which is a document that has the elements of a certain faith's beliefs and practices all lined out for you, and rather than depending on confessions. And there are dramatic debates about confessionalism versus individual authority to read the Bible in the 19th century, as theologians are trying to work this issue out. But so what happens is that the Bible is read literally, and the Bible is the supreme authority, not the Augsburg's Confession, not the London Confession, not any of these confessional documents that have been created. There are all kinds of exceptions to that, but by and large, there's a rejection of that confessional and embrace of a biblically authoritative way of understanding faith and practice. And then the active life of personal holiness. That's incredibly important in Methodism, but it has broad influence across all of the evangelical denominations. And one of the things that we do have to keep in mind here is that this is very much an anti-intellectual approach. One of the authorities, one of the structures of the ecclesiastical order that is being chipped away at and undermined is the authority of trained and very erudite theologians. And as you move into the middle part of the 19th century, that becomes very hyperactively radicalized. This way of approaching religion that I've just outlined is, by the 1830s and 40s in the United States, the dominant mode of expressing religion, and very important. And religion, though it was not a part of the state, was seen by many Americans as an important foundation for national success. And this is well summed up in some observations that were made by Alexis de Tocqueville, that most Americans, he says, really believed that without religion, the state would not be able to function. So it's not a formal part. Very few of the founders were formally evangelicals, but certainly there was a sense at the local level that religion and the right behavior that comes out of religious practice is going to be very, very important to keeping the nation together. So I think that's a reasonably okay overview of the context into which Schmucker finds himself. I do want to outline very quickly the opposition that Schmucker is dealing with.
Can we talk a little bit about his birth years and maybe about his?
You want to do that? No, I want to talk about how I want to read that quote from Helmut.
Yeah,
It's really important to get the contrast.
Let's talk a little bit about about where he comes from, because I think it's important to establish. I think what's the most formative aspect of his upbringing stems from his father. I mean, that's sort of the base of who Schmucker is. So we established that he's born in 1799. He's born in Hagerstown, Maryland, which is about 30 miles southwest of Gettysburg, to a German immigrant father, John George Schmucker, who in his own right is a strong leader in the Lutheran faith. And John had emigrated here from Germany in 1785 with his father, and they settled down in the Woodstock, Virginia area in the Shenandoah Valley. And we'll come back to that a little bit more as we talk about Schmucker's first call as a pastor. But his father was heavily influenced by this German Pietist movement that he had brought over with him from Germany when he emigrates here, and this is what's going to be, I think, sort of the formative aspect of Schmucker's life. He generally seems to be open to some new ideas as he goes through his life, and at some point we should talk about his changing views on slavery, because I think that fits into to Schmucker's existence, that he's able to as he learns more and experiences more, he sort of changes his views, but everything seems to be, at least in his early years, grounded in this sort of Lutheran Pietist tradition from his father. And Daryl, you had looked up you had gotten the definition of pietism, although I don't know if there is a definition or a full definition.
There is a good definition that focuses on Lutheran practice. It's a 17th century movement that does exactly what Pete's been outlining, is that there's this rigorous self-discipline that comes along with it, a very upright, I would say a very stiff performance of religious duty. And something that comes out of this is, because there's the next step to pietism is holiness. And gosh, that's a whole nother conversation. But it's an idea in early Methodism that the whole class system of Methodism is founded on this notion of increasing your own holiness. You're trying to emulate Christ, and you can, through your own efforts, come close to Christ in your perfection. But it has to follow a very rigorous introspection, a very rigorous self-critique, and that leads to the religious critiques of slavery. And so with Schmucker moving into that, as he ages, as he goes through his life, his changes on his changing views fit very well with the larger evangelical pietism, because that literalist structure in that Reformed theology can support both views. And this is one of the things that Noel makes a big point about later on in his work, is that by 1860 there were two very distinctive both of them self-evident ways of reading the Bible. One was pro-slavery and one was anti-slavery. You're not going to get over that without fighting. And that's kind of where things are going. And but Schmucker is part of a much larger transition that's going on in American life that leads to his anti-slavery and abolition views.
And the pietism, his pietism fits into sort of that individualistic reading of the Bible, right? Yeah. So
the Bible is an introspective document in this, that you should be looking at yourself, critiquing yourself. It's almost like he's going through that's way too extreme of a conclusion to draw, but it almost sounds like he goes through something of a Methodist class progression in the way that he's self-disciplining and the way that he's performing.
But he's extraordinarily self-disciplining in sort of a Puritan streak, and I guess that we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I'll fill in a little bit. So we'll get to Princeton Seminary in a second. Yeah. But so Schmucker is born in 1799 in Hagerstown, and his father ends up taking a call in York, Pennsylvania, when Schmucker is growing up. So Schmucker spends a considerable amount of time in York, Pennsylvania, attends the York Academy there, and then goes to school at the University of Pennsylvania. Does not graduate officially, but in 1817 he has this sort of event that sets him on the course of the rest of his life, and he goes on a mission trip with his brother to Kentucky, and as he returns, he decides that he is going to devote his life to being to Lutheranism, and this is where we sort of get to the second major influence in his life, and this is his attendance at Princeton Seminary. And there is not a Lutheran seminary at the time. Well, there is one in in Hartwick, New York, but he doesn't find that it's rigorous enough. He's either going to go to Andover Seminary in Massachusetts or Princeton, and like a good pietist, he does his due diligence and makes the decision to go to Princeton.
After a proper period of discernment.
Yeah, exactly. And this is really going to set him on his mission. This is really going to kind of set him up for what he's going to do for the rest of his life. And one of the things that comes out of his experience at Princeton is this strong tending towards ecumenicalism. Is that the okay?
That's the right way to say it.
That's the right way to say it. This idea that you can to keep the peace between different Christian traditions. And go ahead.
It's a little bit more than that.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sense that Protestants have a common shared
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on conversion, and they should have, instead of having these denominations that are squabbling with each other, they should all come together as one giant denomination. Because when you get to people like Schmucker and particularly Northern evangelicals, there's this sense that it's called millennialism, and they believe that by perfecting the world, by performing holiness, they can bring on the second coming of Christ, and then Christ will come. Once the world is perfect enough, then Christ will return and reign for 1,000 years. The opposite view of what contemporary millennialism is about, by the way.
Okay.
Have you frozen?
You're going. We can still hear you, but we couldn't. You froze up for a second. Now I think you're back. We're fine. You're a little
too,
okay.
So.
Your network bandwidth is low, according to what it says here. I don't know what's going on, but we can still hear you.
Okay, that's fine. I was finished with
okay.
what I had to say.
Okay. Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about the Puritan, the Princeton Seminary?
I'll let you do. I want to talk about some of the older Lutheran theologians to set up what Schmucker is really structurally fighting against, and what ends up making him very unpopular.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, cool. Well, so when you go back into the middle part of the 17th century, you have these, or excuse me, the 18th century, you have a couple of really important Lutheran theologians, J.H.C. Helmuth and Henry Muhlenberg, and they are, by the most strict definition, old confessional Lutherans. And they're very critical and very concerned, and Helmuth, especially in the late 18th century, is very concerned with this rising tide of this what Miele calls this American synthesis, and he doesn't think that individuals need to be turned loose to interpret the Bible for themselves, which is becoming a central tenet of this American synthesis. In 1793, Helmuth wrote, "Altogether reading the Bible that way was altogether harmful when someone reads his whims and fantasies into this holy book. To do this," Helmuth said, "is to make a weather vane out of Scripture, and so turn it in every direction of the imagination. This is to play with the Bible as a child plays with a puppet. This is to explain Scripture as if the Holy Spirit must obey the bidding of the imagination of any old person, regardless of how confused. This is to make the Bible into a dark chaos." And he's criticizing this idea, clearly one of the central tenets of what's coming into dominance in American religious life is this: every man is his own theologian, and every man can read and understand the Bible, and every woman can read and understand the Bible and draw conclusions for themselves. Helmuth is clearly making the argument for the old confessional approach to practice, to the deference that he thinks needs to be paid to the leadership of the denomination. That's kind of the core of what the confessional critique of the American system and the American synthesis is. And so Schmucker wades into those waters.
Yeah, and this is going to become a big thing. We're jumping ahead again a little bit, but as he gets to his first call, he is sent down to Newmarket, Virginia, and he comes into conflict with Paul Henkel, who is a Lutheran leader there, and Paul Henkel's sons had been part of the North Carolina Synod, but eventually splinter away to form the more confessionally minded Tennessee Synod, and this is going to kind of be the sort of conflict that's going to define pretty much the remainder of Schmucker's life is this idea between the confessional Lutherans and his new form of American Lutheranism that he is going to practice and teach. And one of the things that Paul Henkel is saying is that there is a laxity in who they're ordaining in the North Carolina Synod, the Pennsylvania Ministerium, and he steps away and establishes his own synod. And this is all happening at the same time as Schmucker, Samuel Simon, and his father are working to establish a general synod, trying to bring together sort of these small disparate strands of these minor synods into and under this umbrella of a more general synod. So even as early as 1820, there's this idea, and Schmucker, 21 years old, is in the thick of it. You're back. Schmucker is in the we were on low bandwidth, but I think we're okay now. Yeah. And Schmucker is in the thick of it. And I think that the other sort of unpopular approach that Schmucker is going to take is starts to appear now, and this is the idea of this general synod and sort of bringing in these governance structures that he was exposed to at Princeton Seminary, and trying to establish the General Synod, which in some cases is popular, and but other cases is a very unpopular approach. One of the things that he says as he's leaving Princeton Seminary in 1820, he says he wants to do three things. And it sort of turns into four things, and within 12 years he does all of them. One is to translate a form of Lutheran dogmatics into English. One is to establish a seminary. One is to establish a college, and then the fourth, which kind of gets added on later, is to establish this governance structure for Lutheran churches. So he's working very hard. At the same time begins pastoring three and then later four churches in the Newmarket, Woodstock, Virginia area. He gets married. He has a child. His first wife dies. He begins to court another a woman, a daughter of a wealthy slave-owning family, which I think is going to be our next Schmucker topic. Will be how he manages his relationship with slavery starting as early as 1826. But one of the things that becomes very influential is during this time is that he begins to translate this volume of Lutheran dogmatics, and he starts to really formulate and crystallize these ideas of this American Lutheranism. He recognizes sort of this limits of rationalism in reading the Bible, and begins to formulate this idea that's going to really take off for the rest of his life, and going to really influence the way that he forms his seminary. So we're up to kind of the seminary. Do you want to put anything into that?
No, I think this is exactly where he's going. This um, this notion of the old world communalism versus American individualism is precisely where this arc is going.
Okay, let me see if I don't think we had any questions. We were kind of going in and out of there for a little bit. Our voices never cut out. The audio never cut out, but we were kind of freezing on visual. So I think that for the next one, we're going to start to look at really his early seminary years, his relationship with the institution of slavery, because that becomes a very important factor in what he does in Gettysburg and sort of how he's perceived in Gettysburg and what happens there, and then look at what happens in the 1840s as he really becomes more vocal in these ideas and begins his sort of conflict with the more confessional Lutherans like Charles Krauss, who lives just up the ridge from him, and it eventually ends with Schmucker resigning in 1864 and sort of retreating into just becoming more of a writer and not an educator anymore. So, any final thoughts?
No,
Robert.
Say again?
Sorry. Who painted the background? Can you spell the artist's name? That was one. I'll put it in the comments because I'll spell it out, and that was just one of the questions. That was the only question. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Schmucker's fascinating beyond his anti-slavery because he occupies this really interesting space between old world and new world, and he's really trying to negotiate the distinctiveness of German Lutheranism, confessional tradition. He's interacting with multiple rounds of German immigrants into the United States who are seen very differently at different times by portions of the American population. So he's a great figure in thinking about the whole trajectory of American church history in the 19th century, because he very much and very dramatically, as we'll find out next time, very dramatically is in the middle of a debate on what the church should be. Should it be a confessional church where there are ecclesiastical hierarchies, where there are interpretive voices that have authority, or should religion be opened up to anybody, any old person, as Helen put it, making their own conclusions and using the Bible as a child plays with a puppet.
And it almost seems like the different points in his life, he's kind of occupying both spots. He kind of.
I couldn't imagine. He's here with Kraut. He's here with others who are confessional in their approach. It's difficult to imagine that he could become one or the other. Right. Because he's having to function within a structure that is bound by confessions and is bound by church hierarchies. So, and
at different times he's advocating for a church hierarchy, but I don't think he never loses his pietist upbringing.
Oh, no, absolutely.
No. I think that's too ingrained in him from childhood to ever be lost. But the more and more I read about him, and I think we said this to you as we were getting ready. I don't think I said it here yet. Is that he's open to new ideas and perspectives as he moves through life. His ideas and perspectives change, but always has this strong attachment to Lutheranism and Lutheran identity and what's going to make Lutheranism work in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you can join us next week. I'm going to be talking about African American history in the border regions. Again, the week after that, Daryl will be talking to Dr. Chris Moore about J. William Jones and a new book that has just been released. And we have other events. Rob put the events link in our comment section. So if you want to see what we have coming up for the rest of May, be sure to click on that and keep an eye on our Facebook page. And we hope to see you next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So thank you again for joining us.
Y'all take care.
You all come back now here.